So I think we'll start the webinar. So hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today. I'm Alex, one of the youth coordinators here at the Invasive Species Council of BC. Before we get any further, I would just like to mention that this webinar will be recorded to be shared later. So we're tuning in from many different parts of the province, from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of many different bands and nations. I'm joining you personally today from Edmonton, Alberta, on Treaty 6 land, where I'm very thankful to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Sioux, and Métis who have lived on and stewarded the land since time immemorial. I'd love to hear where you're all joining us from today, so please feel free to introduce yourself and where you're calling in from in the chat. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A function and we will try to get to as many questions as possible after the guest speaker presentation. So, as I mentioned, I work for the Invasive Species Council of BC, the largest provincial invasive species charity in Canada. We focus on education, outreach, training, and cross-border collaboration across Canada and internationally. And our mission is to take action to build healthy landscapes, habitats, and communities through education and responsible practices to prevent the spread of invasive species. I'd also like to acknowledge IACBC's affiliate network, which brings together regional independent organizations working to build and provide a strong collective voice for BC, calling for increased action on invasive species. So, before I introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Brian Heise, I want to note that May has once again been proclaimed Invasive Species Action Month by the province of British Columbia, a month-long campaign that generates awareness and engages people living in BC on invasive species and their impacts. All the details on this month's events, including information on upcoming webinars, can be found on our website, bcinvasives.ca. And now it's time for us to get into today's presentation of fish tanks and tackle boxes, invasive goldfish and smallmouth bass in BC. I am now pleased to introduce Dr. Brian Heise. Brian is a faculty member in the Department of Natural Resource Sciences at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, BC, where he teaches courses in ichthyology, fisheries management, limnology, and ecosystem reclamation. His research looks at the effects of various land use practices on freshwater ecosystems, with an emphasis on aquatic invertebrates and invasive fishes. Brian is also a former board chair of the Invasive Species Council of BC. So without further ado, welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much, Alex. I'm delighted to be here. I will just, is it okay if I go ahead and share my PowerPoint now?
Absolutely.
Okay, so. And I think, Alex, it's still disabled, it says on my.
Apologies. Let's get you enabled.
Keep it in there. Hi, Sue. Hi, Tamara. Stefan. Oh, I seem to be okay now. Great. So at this point, you should be seeing the full page PowerPoint slide. Is that showing up okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great, excellent. So I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. I'm here. I'm joining you today from Kamloops on the traditional unceded territory of Tk'emlúps, and I want to point out, though, that a lot of my research takes place in other parts of BC with other First Nations and Indigenous groups, also in other provinces. So those of you that know me know I only have one speed, and that's fast. So I'm going to jump right in here. Hang on. We've got about half an hour to spend on this topic. And today I want to look at two different species, and I've selected them. One is goldfish and one is smallmouth bass. And I've selected them because they really have two different ways of being introduced into our province. One is through the aquarium pet trade, and one is through anglers moving fish around from one water body to another. So a different set of conditions there, different biology in these animals, and but some of the solutions I think are going to be in common. So I'd like to start off and talk about goldfish. I mean, they're nice little aquarium fish. Why are they a problem? Why am I here talking to you today about them? And why are they such incredible super invaders in a lot of our freshwater habitats? Secondly, something has come up and that is really a threat to some of our salmon and trout populations, and that is smallmouth bass. Why are they a problem and why are they successful in BC lakes? And I just want to point out that I love smallmouth bass. I love fishing for them in areas where they're native, for example, the other side of the Rockies. So I don't have a problem with smallmouth bass, but I do have a problem with bass being in watersheds where they're eating juvenile salmon. And so then I'll finish up the third portion here will be on control options for both goldfish and smallmouth bass. And just to spoiler alert, there is no silver bullet here, no magic solution. What we're really doing is controlling populations of these invasive fishes more than getting rid of them. But let's jump in here then, and we'll start off with goldfish. So the goldfish is your regular aquarium fish. You can see it here, but what it's not is a few other closely related species which look fairly similar. So the goldfish, which in the aquarium stores is gold, but is more naturally a kind of a brown kind of color, off color there you can see in the upper right. It's very similar to the Crussian carp. The Prussian carp, very similar looking fish, and these are fish that we have, for example, in Alberta causing problems. And it superficially looks like the koi and carp as well that you can see in the upper left. This this is called the carrot, and it is this huge hybrid fish, and it's a koi carp hybrid. Want to point out that if you want to find a little golden fish and you're not sure whether is it a goldfish, is it a carp of some sort, look at the mouth. The carp, the koi, and the common carps all have barbels, little feelers, if you will, in the corner of the mouth. If you see those barbels, you know that it is not a goldfish. So here's some goldfish that have come out of Dragon Lake that we did in our sampling. You can see some are gold, some are that coppery color. The silvery one in the center there is one of the juveniles as they come out. Goldfish they're originally from Eastern Asia, but they spread around the world. And if we look in British Columbia, we find them pretty much everywhere, right through to the Kootenays, down the lower mainland, the interior, the island, all the way up to Atland, BC. And this map is basically accurate as of a few hours ago. So I want to shout out to Chris for producing that for me. Thanks very much. So what are the problems? Why am I worried about goldfish? Well, there's a number of things that you might not suspect about goldfish that they can do. First of all, they can compete with salmonids, and salmonids means trout and salmon, and other fishes as well, but mostly trout and salmon, because goldfish eat invertebrates, and so do these juvenile stages of these fish, so they're competing for food. Second thing is that goldfish are really messy feeders. They tend to peck at the bottom of the lake or the river. That disturbs the sediments. It brings up a lot of turbidity, and that reduces plant growth in our different water bodies and affects the foraging or food hunting by trout. Third thing, they can introduce parasites and disease to our salmon and trout species. Fourth thing is, getting away from fish for a second, they also will eat the eggs and juveniles of amphibians and interfere actually with some of the reproduction behavior of these amphibians. Fifth one is that they can hybridize with carp and koi, and that can cause problems for the koi industry, for example, which is a fairly expensive fish. And finally, when these goldfish bring in their food in the water, they're bringing in algae, and a certain kind of algae called cyanobacteria, a blue-green algae, actually gets supercharged going through the gut, and they actually produce blooms, harmful blooms of blue-green algae out the poop of these goldfish. So that's a problem too. So I'll show you a few examples, a little bit of data about how these fish are doing in British Columbia. Here's looking at the overlap in diet of the desired rainbow trout that we have in Dragon Lake, very important broodstock population, versus the goldfish. And we can see that both fishes are feeding on cladocerans, which are water fleas or Daphnia in the water column. As well, they both feed on chironomids. So these are two very important food items we find in rainbow trout that the goldfish are also consuming. As I mentioned, their method of feeding also creates a solid turbidity, which makes it difficult for plant to grow. And I mentioned parasites and disease. There are 23 species of parasites that are found in goldfish in North America. And one of them, the big long name, we'll just call it ick. You may be familiar with this if you have an aquarium, the little white spots that show up on your aquarium fish if you have an infestation. And ick has actually caused high mortalities of sockeye salmon in the Skeena watershed. Now, this wasn't coming from goldfish necessarily, but still goldfish are able to spread this disease. And so it is something that could actually affect our salmon populations. Goldfish can also carry certain viruses, for example, Cyprinus herbivirus 2, which is a threat to BC lakes because it can cross-infect other species of fish. So even though it's a cyprinid virus, it actually will spread to other species of fish, and that can cause problems there. I mentioned amphibian populations are affected. Amphibians are, of course, in trouble around the world. There's lots of challenges there. But what the goldfish do is they will actually eat the eggs and sometimes the very young larvae of long-toed salamanders. They will also, it's been shown, I don't know how, this is an odd one, that when you have goldfish in the area, the salamanders stop having sex. I guess they're just really shy amphibians, they stop reproducing, and so that causes a decline in the population that way. And we don't really know what the effects are on endangered amphibians in BC and Washington State, so it's something that I just flag as a potential problem. So why are these goldfish such amazing animals? Why are they spreading? Well, you might think of a goldfish as, gee, it stays small and it doesn't go very far. It just swims around my bowl or my fish tank. But in fact, we know from studies in both Australia and South Korea that goldfish are actually very strong swimmers. Once they get larger, and again, they get the size of footballs, they get, up to 30, 40, up to centimeters in size. They're moving several kilometers a day. And for example, in the Bass River in Australia, 231 kilometers in a year. So they are not staying still. These fish are able to spread quite rapidly. So if they got into some of our river systems, such as the Okanagan or the Fraser, I think they would actually potentially spread quite a bit. They're amazingly tough fish. In fact, it's very hard to kill a goldfish. They can stand temperature range from freezing all the way up to 43 degrees Celsius. They prefer 15 degrees Celsius for spawning. They spawn on plants in the shallows of lakes or slow running waters. So as a result, as long as the water body is going to get up to 15 degrees Celsius, I think the goldfish are going to be okay. Here's an amazing fact. Goldfish are the only vertebrate I'm aware of on the planet that can actually go without oxygen. That's right, like not just hold their breath, but go completely under anoxic conditions. They do this because they developed, we think about 1 million years ago, a mutation. They have an anaerobic pathway that they can use for respiration. So no oxygen is required. It's anaerobic, so they actually produce alcohol as a byproduct through their gills. So amazing. So you can't really suffocate them very easily during a short period of time. They're also very tolerant of salt water, going up to about 21 parts per thousand of salt water. And so they may be able to use the coastal areas to move from one watershed to another. Temperature-wise, I said they're very tolerant. Here's a climate modeling that I did. I looked at where goldfish are found in the lake and then looked at the climate stations for those locations. And anything basically with a blue dot in the upper right there, the province, that's an area where goldfish really may not do well there. But everywhere else in the province, they do just fine. So they're able to handle all of the temperatures around the province. So really, Canadian winters, which are just going to get milder and milder with climate change, pose no problems for goldfish whatsoever. Again, if we look at the chemistry, pH, wide range, 4.5, acidic conditions, all the way up to 10.5, which are very basic conditions. Trout, by the way, can't handle above 9, rainbow trout. So basically, these goldfish can handle conditions that are outside the range of our native salmonids. In terms of what do they require for habitat, they really just need rooted plants for spawning. They put the eggs on the plant, so they'd want that in the water body. Turbidity, they're very tolerant. As I told you, they stir up the bottom, so they're tolerant of those turbidity levels themselves. You may think, well, maybe they won't find enough to eat. Nope, they're omnivores. They'll eat plants, they'll eat animals. Of the animals, they'll feed up in the water column on the zooplankton, small animals that are floating in the water, or they can feed on the bottom, mucking about in the mud. We call that the benthos, the bottom environment, where they'll eat different insects and other invertebrates. So really, we can't do much about that. They're rapid growing. So the petri dish on the left shows the young of the year. They're collected in Dragon Lake in BC. And there's some older fish on the right-hand side that are about 5 to 7 years old. If we look at the growth, this is a student, Lyndon, did this work. He showed that they grow quite rapidly, so that by 7 years of age, they're up around 250 millimeters, 25 centimeters. But that really pales in comparison to the growth rates in Australia. If you look at the Bass River, by 1 year, they're up around almost 200. And wow, 7 or 8 years old, they're going up to 411 millimeters, so 41 centimeters. So that's where I say that these goldfish get the size of footballs or larger, so quite large fish. Reproduction-wise, they can spawn in vegetation in the spring above 15 degrees Celsius. They're fractional spawners, and what that means is that they'll spawn more than once in the summer. So they'll do one early in the spring, then a few more will spawn later in the summer. And what they can do is do traditional spawning, sexual reproduction, where the male fish will fertilize the eggs. But goldfish and some of the other species in their genus can go through something called gynogenesis. There's an amazing process whereby the female goldfish can lay eggs. She doesn't need male goldfish to fertilize eggs. She will have other species of minnows release sperm in the area of her eggs. What that will do is start division of the eggs, but doesn't actually fertilize the eggs. So what you then get are clones. It's a type of cloning there where the female goldfish produces all those clones of herself. So amazing. So all it takes is one female goldfish to get things going. How many eggs do they produce? Well, females can produce typically around 10 to 15,000, but we've seen them as high as 50,000 per female. So that's a lot of reproductive potential there. So moving on to how these goldfish get spread around the province, release of unwanted aquarium fish is the biggie. So there, someone takes a goldfish home and they no longer want the fish and they think it's okay to release it into the local water body, a local pond or lake. They shouldn't be doing that, but that's a major entry point. There's also a few other religious releases. For example, there's Fang Shang within the Buddhist tradition, and there's also the celebration of Persian New Year. And it's illegal in BC, but live bait release might be a potential as well. You may think, well, are pet stores really commonly holding goldfish? Well, one survey that was done in the Pacific Northwest showed that 97% of pet stores have goldfish. Aquarius usually own about 9 fish. And these are the ones that actually admitted formally in a survey, 6.4% admitted to releasing live fish. And I think the number is probably quite a bit higher. And why do they do it? It's convenient. They think it won't do any harm, or some of them just had no reason whatsoever. They just did it. And then more recently, this is a really great idea. It's use of stormwater ponds. It's been done a lot in Southern Ontario, and it's been spread into other provinces as well. And these are areas that take stormwater. It's great for retaining water on the landscape and preventing flooding. But people feel that, hey, it's right in my backyard, I'll take advantage of this. They throw in their goldfish, which quickly become huge. And look at the size of these goldfish that are coming out of these suburban stormwater ponds. So it really is becoming a problem. Once they're in those ponds, people can then move them to other places like lakes, and it becomes quite a problem. So that's the first part about goldfish. So hopefully some things that we didn't know about goldfish, learn a little bit there. Let's move on to another species I'm quite interested in, smallmouth bass. My students and I have looked at smallmouth bass in a few different areas in British Columbia, such as Cultus Lake in the Lower Mainland, also out in Manitoba. And then right now we're looking at smallmouth bass eating juvenile Chinook salmon in the Okanagan. So smallmouth bass, it's a great sport fish, and you can identify them. They have those double, if you look at the back of the fish, has the double dorsal fins on the back, spiny rays in the front. Typically, they have these array of lines on the side of the head and vertical bars on the side of the body. This is an older map, but just shows the purple, blue is where they traditionally are found, and then all the other dots are where they've expanded. And they're all over British Columbia. They're on the island, they're in the Okanagan, etc. So why am I concerned about bass? Well, smallmouth bass are great predators. They can open their mouth up. They have suction feeding, and they're very efficient carnivores. They eat invertebrates, so things like crayfish. They'll also eat fishes. They become piscivorous or fish eating at age 2, and they love to chow down on juvenile salmon, juvenile trout, fishes like that. We started doing some work in the Okanagan last week, and I think the second bass we pulled out actually had started throwing up juvenile salmonids. So yeah, they're definitely eating a lot. One study in the Pacific Northwest said that 35% of out-migrating salmon were being consumed by bass. They also will eat some of our endangered or listed fishes like the Matilla dace. And I want to point out that one of the problems that we have with smallmouth bass in the province is that they are so popular with anglers. People love to catch smallmouth bass. As I mentioned at the beginning, I loved fishing for smallmouth bass in other provinces where they're native. They're a great sport fish, but the problem is that the bass fishing lobby wants to keep them in water bodies and keep introducing into water bodies where they can be eating our juvenile salmon and trout. So this graphic shows in the Columbia system, the yellow are smallmouth bass distribution. So pretty much everything in this graphic is a smallmouth bass. And then the salmonid special ecologically sensitive units there are shown in the cross-hatching, evolutionary special units rather. And so it really shows the complete overlap there, so that if you have trout and salmon in these watersheds with bass, we've got problems. Our Martina Beck works with the province. She's her master's on smallmouth bass, and these are rainbow trout that were consumed. And it just shows that basically the stocking of rainbow trout in these lakes rather that had smallmouth bass, basically it was just feeding bass. So they really do like to chomp down. And this graph shows that for a period in the 80s to 2005, we're looking at the amount of money available and the number of bass fishing tournaments that we had. And so we're looking at, what, 200 bass tournaments? That's not in the United States, that's just in Washington State. And in those tournaments, there's huge prizes. It's very, very serious business. And so those of us who are trying to control the spread of invasive fishes, there's a real challenge here with that industry. We wanted to show that they were actually consuming some of our endangered species down the lower mainland. So one of the places smallmouth bass are found there is Cultus Lake, and Winnie Margette's, we just had a paper come out last month about this, but it's showing that the destruction of native fishes, both sculpins and sockeye salmon, was happening with smallmouth bass. And somebody looked at the contents of the stomachs of these bass visually and using DNA barcoding. And you can see a number of different groups, invertebrates for sure, but also a number of different fish species, including the special endangered group of sockeye salmon were found inside the bass. And the salmon have to go right by the top right in the diagram showing in this lake. The outflow, if you can see my cursor here, at Swelter Creek in the upper right, the salmon have to pass by there, and it's a great place for the bass to pick them off. Okay, so they're eating fish. They're doing that in Cultus Lake. They're doing that in the Okanagan. So anywhere we have endangered salmon and their smallmouth bass are eating these fish. So now I'd like to move on, and for the third part of my talk about what are your options for controlling goldfish and smallmouth bass in these water bodies. And some of them are specific to one species or the other, but a lot of them are in common. So jumping in then, what are some of the control options? I'll list a few of them starting off here. First of all, you could go out and you could try to catch these goldfish and the smallmouth bass. You can use, if you have the right permits, you can use gill nets or pike nets. You can use angling, or you could just take dip nets from shore. All of these techniques have been shown to be not very effective for catching these fish. Number two, and this is only available if you had a very small water body and if there were no endangered or special fish in that water body, and that is to use a poison called Rotenone. It's a naturally occurring chemical in plants harvested in South America. The Rotenone kills anything that breathes through gills, so you can kill off all the fish in the lake and then restock the trout or whatever that you'd like to put back in. Using any kind of poison is, of course, controversial, but it is an option. It has been used quite successfully by the province in controlling invasive bass, sunfish, and perch in the Kamloops area, for example, in the interior. Number three would be boat electrofishing in the spring. Both goldfish and smallmouth bass spawn in the spring in the shallows. So if you went and concentrated your effort there, it would be quite cost effective. Electrofishing can be used, but both Rotenone and electrofishing are quite expensive endeavors. And I'll talk about that in a few slides, but if you have the funds, it is something that can be quite effective. The best way, of course, is just to not get these invasive fishes in there in the first place. So first of all, there's don't let it loose, or the public and habitat attitude. All these programs are aimed at informing the public at best behavior practices. They shouldn't be releasing pets. And so that is something that I think the word's been getting out, but people continue to release. We still have more and more introductions of fish into more and more water bodies. I think that although we're getting across to some of the public, I think we have to take the next step, which is to look at the pet trade and work closely with the pet trade. And I know there's a program now that's working with the pet trade, but I believe it is voluntary. We can talk about that during the question and answer period at the end, but I would love to see the pet trade step up and actually take responsibility for all the pets they sell. I think they should be prepared to take them back either into their store or to take care of the basically the euthanasia. I don't think that they should be giving out pets, whether it's a snake, a bird, a turtle, or a fish, and not be taking it back to the pet store where they were sold. I know that's a big ask, but I'd like to see that going forward. So just to look at some of these techniques in a little bit more detail, because we've got lots of time here. Okay, so here's Happy Dustin. That's a gill net, which if you have the proper permitting, you can use to eliminate fish. It does tend to harm any fish that go in there, so it's difficult to catch non-target or a species you don't want to catch and release them again. And it's not incredibly effective for all species, but it can be used. This is called a fyke net, where the fish go, or they move from the left towards the right. They get trapped in the net. You can use that to catch fish. Again, you'd have to have a permit to use this kind of gear. The advantage here is that the fish can be released afterwards. They all swim down to something called the cod end, where you can then, where they all accumulate, you can go in there, keep the fish you want to retain, for example, goldfish, and release any trout that went into that net. So that's another piece of equipment. Or you can just use dip netting from your dock, and it looks like it's very successful, but really, given the size of the problem, this is probably not the best option in the world. So I mentioned already Rotenone, but I want to talk a little bit more about it. So it's in it's a natural chemical found in the pea and bean family. It's used by indigenous populations in South America to actually catch fish for consumption. It's a chemical that kills all gill-breathing organisms, including fish and aquatic invertebrates. Should mention, though, that if you are killing fish and those fish then, once they're dead, are eaten by bears, eagles, etc., there is no toxicity. The chemical is broken down completely in the guts of birds and mammals, so there's very low toxicity here. And so there's not really a health concern, but it is killing all the fish in the lake. The invertebrates tend to come back quite quickly. Some of them can actually escape the chemical by going into the mud, but you also, of course, have to have proper permitting to use Rotenone to control any kind of nuisance fish in a water body. So these people, this is the province doing an application in one of the interior lakes. They are in full gear because of provincial regulations, not because it's actually toxic, but it does work very effectively at killing all the fish in the lake. It is rather expensive. Rotenone treatments, this is going back to 2017 prices, for one lake that was treated cost almost $1 million. You're also going to have to provide usually drinking water. For example, it cost $150,000 for drinking water for Garden Lake residents when that was done. And, you know, let's say you want to treat Dragon Lake, you're probably talking $1.5 million. If you have a very small water body, you could probably do it for as little as $30,000, but it's not insignificant. Certainly there's a fair cost there. And if you're going to be doing anything using Rotenone, I'd stress it's very important to get out there and talk to the public first. You have to have public meetings, a number of them, to discuss it with the public. You can't just go in and surprise people with saying, oh, by the way, next weekend we're going to Rotenone. You definitely want to get the public on board. Another technique for harvesting fish is electrofishing. This can use a backpack electrofisher that you can walk around with on the left, or on the right you can see an electrofishing boat. And what this can do is either stun or kill fish, depending on how you set it up. And if the PowerPoint gods are with me now, I'm going to play a little video showing you the collection of goldfish in Dragon Lake using electrofishing. And so there's a motor going, so those are the electrodes. You can see the fish are being stunned there, and then they're just scooped up, and there's the bin of stunned fish on the side. So that worked quite well. Again, this is very expensive. You can't just go out and do electrofishing yourself. You have to have certification to do this, and you have to have a properly outfitted boat. So typically you're going to be getting a consultant to help you do this. A boat, 3-person crew for a couple of days is going to cost you probably $10,000. I'd recommend doing this in the springtime when goldfish are in the shallows and the weeds, and they're easy to catch there. But you're not going to get all the fish. This is not a way of eliminating fish. You're just suppressing the population. And so because of that, you have to go back year after year, which gets quite expensive. And here's some of Russ Bobrowski's data on the year and the catch. And the catch went down, but it's not something that will happen right away. And here's a new one. Here's something that, that see if this will float your boat. This is a new technique, and it's using spearfishing. And this was a master, Alex Predome, worked with me, and this was working in Rocky Mountain National Park in Manitoba on Clear Lake. There's a beautiful smallmouth bass that was spearfished. And when I say spearfishing, it's not a big, powerful spearfish. It's not a dangerous thing. It's a sling. So it's a big rubber band, and it looks like a big fork on the end. And so this was done in Rocky Mountain National Park. And I want to show you what this would look like. So I'm going to play the video here. So we're going to follow. There's a nice smallmouth bass on a rocky substrate. So it's swimming along, and the research is going to come from the bottom right, I think, with the spear. Minding its own business. Oh, sorry, from the left. There we go. Boom. That was it. Very, very quick. One shot. And we're only talking a range of between 1 and 2 meters. So it's not a very dangerous operation. And look at the bottom video here. Look at all the dirt in the water, all those black specks. Well, that's not dirt. Those are fish. It is completely just saturated with juvenile smallmouth bass once they come out of the nest. So, wow, that's to me, that's a scary video in terms of. Going to go on. So Alex compared spearfishing to other techniques such as angling. Spearfishing works well for smallmouth bass because the smallmouth bass, they actually attend to a nest. So the male will build a nest, the female comes and lays the eggs. And I know we just had Mother's Day, but sorry, fish mothers are terrible. They're the worst mothers in the world. They lay the eggs and they take off. In the fish world, it's the males that typically do the parental care. So the male bass will stay with the eggs, defending the eggs, making sure the silt doesn't cover them over. He is able to fan them with his fins, and then even the young are defended for a little while. As a result, you can swim right up to them. They will confront you, and for spearfishing, it works really well, sorry. And spearfishing was 3 times more efficient than angling, but these are skewed results. It's actually much more efficient than that. Maybe this question period you want to talk about the biases. This was the worst case scenario where we were counting the time of swimming to and from the nests and back to the boat, individual fish. If you were to do this as a control program rather, you would have a stringer of fish, and so you would actually be much more efficient. And also we had professional anglers doing the angling, and so it's really, even with professional anglers and inefficient techniques of spearfishing, it was way more efficient, and I'd highly recommend it. If we're looking at the left side graph here, these are the fish that were collected. So the length of the fish is on the bottom x-axis. On the y-axis is the weight of the fish. So you'll see that the angling and electrofishing caught the smaller fish. But if I want to highlight that group of fish in the upper right on that left-hand graph in Clear Lake, all the larger fish were caught using spearfishing. Electrofishing did not catch the big fish. Electrofishing was great for small fish, juveniles, but was not effective for the adults. So I really think that spearfishing should be considered as being a technique that the BC provincial government could consider using in some places like maybe Cultus Lake. And then finally, it's the politics. We have to get politicians to really embrace this. So I'm standing on the left. There's Gail Wallen and Dave on the right talking to ministers. We have to get them, of course, engaged with the cause. So we want to be doing that. And I want to put pressure on not just myself, but fellow researchers. We have to get out there and get the public engaged. We have to make sure that we're talking to the public, and often it requires a soundbite. I found this with the ISCBC, Invasive Species Council of BC forum last year, where I gave a few interviews, and we had this little soundbite. I talked about the goldfish were the size of footballs. And boy, did that ever go crazy. So it got picked up coast to coast, all over the place, where people were talking about goldfish the size of footballs, got a lot of press. And so I think this is the sort of thing that we have to do. We have to get people that work with these fish into the public realm to spread the word. By the way, I just noticed the other day that I was being misquoted. I saw one article, there was another CBC article actually, that said there were schools of goldfish the size of football fields in British Columbia Lake. So I got a chuckle out of that one. So what are my conclusions? Well, once we have invasive fishes, whether it's going to be, and there's a number of I've chosen today to talk about smallmouth bass and goldfish. We also have things like yellow perch. We have largemouth bass, lots of different fish species. Once they're established in a large water body, really all you're doing is controlling the size of the population. You're restricting population size, not eradication is really the only reasonable option. Very small water body, you could go in and Rotenone, but that's really the exception rather than the rule. Best management is going to be basically stopping people moving fish around. That primarily is going to be anglers moving these different sport fishes into different water bodies. And of course, it's the pet trade selling these species of fish, which then people will release once they no longer want them at home. And so it's going to be the public campaigns, don't let it loose, clean, drain, dry, boats, programs like that that are really going to help out here. Okay, so I was going to have one slide for acknowledgements, but too many people and agencies to thank. So all this research takes place because of generous funding and because of lots of student work. So these are acknowledgements for the goldfish studies that have been taking place, and special thanks to the province with all of their help. Working at Cultus Lake, we worked with a number of different agencies there, including the local people who are on the lake and with government agencies there. And then with a smallmouth bass on Clear Lake, working with a number of Indigenous groups, as well as Parks Canada. And so I want to thank all of those groups for all their help. And let's see, I was asked to 31 minutes. I'm at 31 and a half, so I think I'll quit there. And hopefully there'll be a few questions and we can have a discussion about that. So again, thanks for having me today. Pleasure to be here. That's it.
Well, thank you, Brian, for that great
Stop sharing.
presentation. We now have a few minutes for questions. If you have a question for Brian, please type it into the Q&A box. But it looks like we already got a few, so.
Oh, great. So Alex, you're going to take questions, are you going to read them out and all? Is that how we're going to work? Or
yeah, I think that's
okay,
the best way to do it. I'll just do it in the order that we got them.
oh,
So,
okay, great.
what do you think is the single most critical thing we can all do to deal with goldfish discovered in the wild and to prevent the spread of aquatic invasives?
Okay, I think that our biggest thing here is going to be, first of all, education. We have to make sure that that message gets out there that it's not cool to release your pets. Doesn't matter what kind of pet it is. Pets do not belong in the wild. They may do very poorly and suffer when you do that, or they may cause problems. So that's the one thing. I think we also have to be talking to the pet trade and really get some changes made there. In terms of what can we do once you find them in your local water body, that's a real challenge. I talked just now about a number of different techniques there. I think that any organization, for example, a municipality, will want to talk to the province and see what some of their options are legally to go in there. They'll also have to consider their budget, because some of these techniques are certainly very expensive. Others are a little less expensive.
Okay. Next question by an anonymous user. In all of your years of study, what has surprised you the most about goldfish and invasive fish?
I think what has amazed me most is how resilient they are. The fact that goldfish don't need to have sexual reproduction to get their populations expanding, and the fact that goldfish can actually live without oxygen for certain periods of time. It never ceases to amaze me how adaptable nature is. Nature will find a way, just like Jurassic Park. So I think that that whenever we start introducing fish or any other invasives to a new environment, I don't think we can really predict with any certainty what's going to happen. I think we really have to consider that these species are going to adapt. All of our studies we've done over the years have shown that, for example, fish in BC will spawn at cooler temperatures than what the literature says. So just because a fish spawns at a certain temperature in Ontario doesn't mean that when you stick it in a BC lake, it's going to have those same restrictions. So watch out. Fish are really adaptable, and if you put them in a water body, they're going to spread.
So our next question is actually two questions by Nick Wong. So his first question is, how difficult is identifying stomach contents in the fish? Do fish chew? Is the stomach contents pretty broken up?
Okay. It's a mess, I must admit. When you were looking at the stomach contents of smallmouth bass, first of all, even pre-digestion, the gill rakers are very coarse in these piscivorous or fish-eating fish. They're there to descale the fish. And so anything we find in the stomach of a bass is already in rough shape. For that reason, we did two techniques. We used both a visual inspection, and sometimes it's pretty easy. For example, if small bass love crayfish, for example, if they're eating crayfish, the chelipeds, the pinchers, if you will, they're really tough. They preserve quite well. They go right through the stomach. We find them right through into the intestines, for example. Whereas if it's some kind of zooplankton or a soft-bodied aquatic insect, often they are pretty digested. and I've had to go in and identify the diet based on little leg segments or a piece of a head or something like that. For that reason, the molecular techniques are really going to be helpful. For the smallmouth bass study that Wendy did, we used DNA barcoding. And how that works is you take the sample, you send it to a lab. For example, at the University of Guelph, they have a Barcode of Life project, and they will look at the DNA of everything in that sample and tell you what was in that stomach. So that will probably tell you what they're eating, but you have the problem of the prey in the prey. So if a bass is eating a minnow, which is eating mayflies, mayfly DNA is going to be in your mix, but maybe the bass weren't eating the mayflies directly. So that is one concern. Second concern is that it's very expensive when you do those barcoding techniques. So for our study in the Okanagan this summer, we want to know if the smallmouth bass down in the Okanagan lakes and river are eating salmon, and if so, what species of salmon. So there we're using qPCR. It's another molecular technique, but in that technique, you identify which species of fish you're interested in, and they only look for the DNA of those species. So we're looking for 4 species of salmon and trout. It's a lot less expensive. So if you have an interest in finding this out and you're thinking, how do I do this? I'd go for that sort of technique over the broader DNA barcoding technique.
All right. And next second question is, how successful are invasive fish derbies? I know they're pretty popular for certain species in the US, like lionfish spearfishing competitions. Do you see them as an effective management tool for bass or goldfish?
Wow. I've got an answer for you. When we planned the research for the Okanagan, we thought this is great. There are bass tournaments on Soyuz Lake, for example. So I thought, great. What we'll do is we'll get in touch with the organizers and we'll say, hey, we'd like to keep some of the bass from the tournament, please, because we want to analyze what's in the stomachs. So that was the plan. It ends up once the bass tournament organizers found out what we were doing, they stopped even talking to us. Why? Because they want smallmouth bass to stay forever. And so the bass tournaments are catch and release because they want those bass to reproduce, to increase the population size, to get bigger, etc. So unfortunately, my answer is that the bass tournaments has been a total dud. At least working in British Columbia. I think it's still a great idea, but you have to have a tournament that's organized such that you get to keep the bass to suppress the population. So I think it could be a great way. Certainly the lionfish have been used very successfully down in the States. They've even got cookbooks on how you cook up your lionfish afterwards. I know that there are, for example, tournaments for northern pike minnow on Cultus Lake in Chilliwack. The northern pike minnow is not an invasive fish. It's a native fish, but it is piscivorous. It does eat local salmon. And so that fishery there, that tournament is there to try to suppress the population, just so there's not too many of these native predators. So yes, it could be a great way to combat invasive species. But if we're going to do that, we have to, first of all, do the PR job of convincing the bass fishing lobby that this is something worthwhile doing.
Right. Awesome. Our next question from John. Do native predators, i.e. birds and otters, reduce invasive fish populations? Is there some other biotic control that could be specific to fish?
Sure, yes, they do. And so I've seen just heads sitting around, for example, on the side of lakes, goldfish heads. So otters, for example, probably muskrats. I think you had a great photograph there. I think at the start, didn't you, Alex? Where we started here today, and that showed, was it a heron? A heron
Yeah, I
with
think it was a heron. Yeah.
a heron. So herons, they definitely will feed on goldfish. Now, they're pretty easy to spot initially because they're golden colored, but once they become naturalized into the habitat, they become that bronzy brown color. They're harder to see. So I imagine that the predation rates would actually go down over time. But yes, native predators do. And something else that Russ Bobrowski has mentioned, that in Dragon Lake, the goldfish are reproducing, but they have a strain of rainbow trout, couple of strains actually in rainbow trout in that lake, which are piscivorous or fish eating. And so the trout are actually getting quite large because they're eating the juvenile goldfish. So the trout won't eat the big ones, but they'll eat the juveniles. So maybe that lake will be in equilibrium. Maybe the predation by trout will actually control goldfish, but it's still best just not to put goldfish in there in the first place.
Yeah. Looks like we have about four more questions. Let's try to get through them all. Our
Great.
next one from Sue is, hi, Brian. I might have missed this, but is there a population estimate for the number of goldfish in BC?
Hi, Sue. And I'm not aware of a population estimate. No, not that I'm aware of. We have the maps that the province generously produces, which show where the fish are found, but not a population estimate. No. And if somebody knows of one, please, I'd love to be corrected on that one.
Craig would like to ask, are there any emerging technologies or techniques to manage invasive fish on the horizon that you're interested in seeing more research on?
I think we need more research. Some of them have been proposed. The spearfishing that I mentioned today is one new thing that hasn't been used yet in BC. I think there's potential for it. A second technique is to use Judas fish. And how that works is that you put a transmitter in a fish, like say it's a goldfish or a bass, and then you use through telemetry, you follow it around and you find out where the population is hiding during some time of the year. For example, in the wintertime, when they're deeper water, how do you find them to get rid of them? Well, a Judas fish approach could work there. I know in Australia, they've been working on a virus that they want to release to kill invasive carps. I think well, I'm not an expert on viruses and disease. I think it's a little bit scary introducing a virus into the wild that kills one species because I worry that it might spread to other species, but there might be technology like that that could work quite effectively if it was specific enough.
All right. Awesome. Our next question, also from John, is, I heard spearfishing is used to control lionfish. How might spearfishing in BC watersheds compare to what happens in the ocean?
Well, certainly in the ocean, they use different techniques. They're using a full-size spear gun that they're going after these lionfish, and you have to chase around the lionfish. The bass, because the males sit on the nest, they stay put. And so it's actually an ideal situation for doing spearfishing or sling fishing, because as I mentioned, it's a sling. It's a quite safe technique. It doesn't go very far, maybe a meter or two. And so one of the oppositions to having some kind of spearfishing control in British Columbia lakes is that you could have safety concerns. You may have somebody swimming in the area, or maybe there's fear that a spear could go and puncture boats or something like that. But I don't think that's a realistic concern. I think it should be considered. You'd have to have, by the way, all the spearfishing that was done by the grad student and crews in the park, where they did a 3-day course first. So they became certified spearfishers. So they were safe, they knew what they were doing. So I think it definitely is something could be used for smallmouth and largemouth bass in British Columbia.
All right. A question from Staffen. I read somewhere that smallmouth bass should not be consumed due to high levels of heavy metals. Can you comment on that?
I certainly, I know in Ontario, for example, the Great Lakes, if you're consuming fish, there are advisories about how much you can eat, and it's less if you're a pregnant woman, for example. But I haven't seen any data on BC for levels of metals in fish. Certainly, these top food chain predators are going to be accumulating organic and inorganic materials, I think, but I just haven't seen any data on that. So it's something that I would think about. I would certainly be careful and not probably eat too many fish, but people eat tuna all the time, for example, canned tuna. Those tuna are accumulating mercury and other metals in the ocean. So I think it's a matter of everything in moderation. Fish are usually very healthy to eat because of the omega-3 fatty acid content, etc. So I would not have a hard time eating some fish. I just wouldn't go crazy. Great question, though. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for it.
All right. And our last question, it looks like, is, have triploid bass and goldfish ever been used as a control measure?
Oh, a great idea to look at using triploids. Certainly do that for our trout program. I am not aware of it being tried for bass. No, it's been tried for certain salmonids in the States, but not for bass to my knowledge. Most of the research that takes place on bass is how to get more bass. It's done in the United States, where bass is really big business, and as a result, uh, I've actually gone to conference, for example, talking about the problem with in the Columbia system. I had a grad student, Dan Dutas, work on northern pike, and they're eating salmonids. And so I went and talked about this at a conference. And one of the questions was, well, what's the problem? Don't we want more northern pike, not less? Because these are very attractive sport fish. Often the reception is a little bit a bit of bewilderment. People don't realize perhaps that they can cause a real problem. And it's not a problem if you want to give up on salmon and trout, but I want to point out that for a lot of indigenous populations in British Columbia, having salmon goes beyond mere, it's not just a source of protein, it is a very important cultural and sociological entity. And so I think it's worth saving. I think it really is important to try to contain these populations of invasive fishes.
Right. Well, it looks like we just got through the entire Q&A, which is awesome. So I think
Yay.
we'll go ahead and start closing the webinar. So as we close, I want to thank you again, Brian, for sharing your expertise in such an engaging and informative way. To
Thank
all
you.
those in attendance, a recording of this webinar will be posted shortly. A reminder again that you can check out our website, bcinvasives.ca, for all kinds of information, including details on Invasive Species Action Month. Be sure to check out our store as well. We have a new Report Invasives poster and goldfish sticker, and you'll also find one of our most popular stickers, the Don't Let It Loose sticker, which ties into Brian's webinar today. But thank you all again. Next week, be sure to join us for the next in our Invasive Species Action Month webinars on Thursday, May 23rd from 3:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. We'll be joined by our education team, Stephanie Weinstein and Jennifer Hegan, who will share some engaging activities and educator resources and that support invasive wise school garden projects. Come learn about ways to connect students to nature in the schoolyard while taking action to prevent the spread of harmful invasive plants. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.